Welcome back to the Banker Pippo YouTube channel. I'm Bryce, and this is another episode of Women's Soccer World. That's right. After, I think this is 30 episodes, I finally found a name for the podcast, so thank goodness for that. Another busy show today. Got a lot of stuff that went on this week. A lot of U.S. Women's National Team news is starting to get on the horizon because the Summer Series is in a month, and then the Olympics is going to be shortly after. So, wow, time flies when you're having fun. So, let's just kind of get right into it. We'll start off with some U.S. Women's National Team news. We'll go into some FIFA news, and then we'll go into some NWSL news. So first, starting with the U.S. Women's National Team, Tobin Heath, according to Vlatko Andonovski, says, quote, "She's back on the field training on her own. We're hoping pretty soon that she's going to be in team environment with the national team." Meaning, it sounds like Tobin Heath is going to be back in time for the Olympics and maybe even for some of the send-off games, which would be absolutely sweet. He didn't say anything official in that quote, so I'm kind of approaching this with cautious optimism, but I'm looking at it as Tobin Heath's injury is progressing really, really well, her knee injury that she sustained, and that we'll see her in the Olympics this summer. Hopefully I didn't accidentally say World Cup just now, but so I'm really, really excited for it. Without Tobin Heath, I think it makes Vlatko's job a lot harder trying to figure out who's going to be on that right wing. The natural replacement might be either Kristen Press, or he might do a 4-3-3 with Alex Morgan, Kristen Press, and Megan Rapinoe up top. So who knows? But I think with Tobin Heath, it makes everything a lot more dynamic because she's indispensable to the U.S. Women's National Team. It makes her a lot better. And me as a big Tobin Heath fan myself, oh, thank God we get to see her in another Olympics. Hopefully. Like I said, being cautiously optimistic here, but hopefully we'll see her in the red, white, and blue this summer. So really exciting stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Are you as excited as I am to see Tobin Heath this summer? Jump down in the comments below and let me know whatever your thoughts are. All right, some more U.S. Women's National Team injury news. So this time it's surrounding Julie Ertz. Julie Ertz suffered an MCL sprain in last week's defeat to the Portland Thorns. So last week, Julie Ertz was playing in the game. She collided with Rocky Rodriguez, and she sprained her right MCL, which whenever you hear the two medical terms MCL and ACL or cruciate ligament, you always get a little scared because those injuries, if you do tear them, are very, very severe. It's like you're talking a year timeline to return to playing, but it's just a sprain, so it doesn't sound like the worst case scenario for Julie Ertz. So this is what Jeff Kassouf's had to say about it on Twitter. I quote, "Out for summer series, expect her back for Olympic send-off games and to be ready to go for the Olympics." So a bit of a scare there. Obviously, whenever a U.S. Women's National Team player gets injured, it's very concerning for us as fans because all these players are some of the best in the world. They're very valuable for their teams. And it's really strange because I've never heard of two players as indispensable as Julie Ertz and Tobin Heath getting injured at the same time, at least since I've been a fan of the U.S. Women's National Team. So this is a very interesting time throughout their history. And I would say this too. To me, Julie Ertz is the most indispensable player on the entire roster for many, many reasons, which is why I was really nervous when hearing about this injury for a few reasons. One, she's one of the main anchors of the defense despite being a midfielder. A lot of times when they use her, at least from what I've seen, they use her as like a holding midfielder, and she basically helps out a lot on defense in that respect. She's the anchor for the midfield. She's really good at it. She was a former central defender, and I believe sometimes still does play central defense. And she has such a presence in the midfield. It's one of the best in the world. I've never seen anything like it. She absolutely dominates every midfield. When she has possession, she holds it. She never lets it go. If somebody else loses possession, she gets it back probably within a few seconds. Like her and Sam Ewis, Lindsey Horan, Rose Lavelle, they dominate the midfield so well and they retain possession so much. It's so common, and we're spoiled as fans to see the U.S. typically have 65-70% possession at least in most games. And I think a large part of that is due to Julie Ertz. And if you don't have the ball, you can't do anything with it. So that's another reason that makes Julie Ertz so indispensable in this case. She gets you the ball and she keeps the ball when she has it. So really, really interesting stuff overall. I'm just glad that it sounds like she'll be ready to go for the Olympics. So I'm going to operate under the assumption she will be in the Olympics. I want to pursue the hypothetical just for a second here, if you guys will indulge me. What would happen if she didn't? If she wasn't ready to go for the Olympics? I'd be really curious to see how much harder Vlatko's job would get. I know that he's got a lot of talent in the midfield. There's no denying that. He's probably got 6-7 midfielders that are world class that he could use. However, none of them play in the midfield like Julie Ertz does. None of them have that defensive acumen like Julie does. And like I said, Julie's defensive acumen and prowess is so high that he could build the formation around Julie. A lot of times, at least from what I've seen, it's been mostly a 4-3-3 with Julie as the holding midfielder. That's just me personally, what I've seen. If you guys have noticed other things, feel free to just put it down in the comments below. But one thing I noticed leading up to this particular time period in the U.S. Women's National Team camps and games is that Vlatko has been using a 4-2-3-1 for some games, at least for some of the time. I heard JP Delacamera and Ali Wagner mention this a few times. I heard Heather O'Reilly mention it once or twice, that the U.S. was actually playing in a 4-2-3-1 throughout a couple of their friendlies, and I believe throughout the She Believes Cup as well. And I have a theory surrounding that, and this is my theory. My theory is that Vlatko recognized how valuable Julie Ertz was to their team and to the midfield and their formation, where he had to think to himself, okay, hypothetically speaking, if Julie Ertz can't play, what is our formation going to look like? What are we going to do? And I believe, me personally, I believe that he did and experimented with the 4-2-3-1 a little bit to see how the team would cope and what he could do tactically in order to compensate for that difference. So I don't know if it's a far-reaching theory. To me, it sounds pretty reasonable because you want to assess what happens when you lose the best players out on the pitch, especially one as indispensable as Julia Ertz. So I believe that's maybe one of the main reasons why he experimented with a 4-2-3-1 throughout some of the friendlies. At least that's what I saw going on. You guys can comment down below whatever you saw or whatever your theories are surrounding that. Be my guest for sure. But that's just some of my thoughts on Julia Ertz's injury. I'm just happy it sounds like her and Tobin will be playing in the Olympics this summer. Not really a whole lot of details given out, and it's kind of weird because I've noticed with the U.S. Women's National Team, they don't really reveal a lot of information about their injuries, and that's why we really haven't heard anything about Tobin Heath's injury, because they seem to be very hush hush about their injuries. At least that's something I've kind of noticed throughout. So food for thought. I guess we'll kind of see what happens. So, ladies and gentlemen, what do you make of the Julie Ertz injury situation? Feel free to jump down in the comments below and let me know. All right, so now that we've gotten through the U.S. Women's National Team stuff, just a reminder, Summer Series is going to be kicking off in actually a few weeks now, not even a month, so stay tuned for that. That's going to be going on in Texas. I ran across something really interesting this morning, actually preparing for the podcast today, and listen to this. FIFA is launching a feasibility study to address a World Cup every 2 years rather than every 4 years, according to the BBC. So this is really, really interesting. So apparently at FIFA's annual conference, or Congress, I guess you could say, the Saudi Arabian Football Association, I believe their SAFA, proposed a document, a proposal. So I'm trying to remember the right term for it, where they would look into perhaps doing a study where they would see, would it make sense for FIFA to host a men's and women's World Cup every 2 years rather than 4? And this got a pretty hefty favorable vote. 166, according to the article, 166 national federations voted in favor of conducting the study, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm interpreting the article correctly, that is. While only 22 national federations voted against the proposal. So I want to be clear, before everybody runs screaming saying that the World Cup is officially only going to be every 2 years. Now stop. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, and like I said, if I'm interpreting this article from the BBC correctly, it sounds like FIFA is going to be looking into do a World Cup for both the men's and women's side every 2 years. So for me, this is absolutely fascinating to think about. It's like, because of the fact that FIFA's done a World Cup every 4 years since basically its inception. But this is just a proposal. If, like I said, I want to be super clear. This is just, if I'm interpreting this right, I think this is just a proposal to look into doing it. It's not anything official yet, but hypothetically speaking, if this did happen, if FIFA went with a World Cup for both the men's and women's side every 2 years, how would this shape up? So me, I'm going to put in some of my personal bias here. For me personally, I'm all for it if they did a World Cup every 2 years for many, many reasons. One, I absolutely love the World Cup. It's one of my favorite competitions and sporting events in the world. And from a U.S. Women's National Team's perspective, it's one of the most exciting times to be a fan for a few reasons. One, we all come together, we all watch the games. Everyone's really hyped. Everyone's really excited for it. And that's just what fandoms do, right? And with the US Women's National Team being the most successful women's team in the world, it builds up the hype even more. So it's a really exciting time to be a fan overall. And even for those who aren't diehard U.S. Women's National Team fans, I know a lot of people who are not women's national team fans who watch the Women's World Cup because the U.S. is so good. And in doing so and having this World Cup more often, you get more opportunities to create a larger fan base. When people hear the World Cup, ears perk up and people watch. Even people who don't even like, I know people who don't even like soccer who love watching the World Cup. I mean, of course, this is just speaking in my little small microcosm of life. There's a great big wide world out there, which is why they're conducting a study on this and not just asking me about it. But in doing every 2 years, it just draws more attention and more exposure to the women's game that it wouldn't have otherwise, and even the men's game as well. Especially for the women's game because of the fact that not everybody has access cable wise to watch the NWSL, the FAWSL, or Division One Feminine. It's getting better in terms of access in that respect, but like I said, not too many people are very big fans of the women's game in terms of club football from what I've seen yet. It's like a lot of the people that I talk to are mainly national team supporters across the board. Like I said, that's just in my small microcosm, but that's just what I'm observing and why I'm forming this opinion that I'm forming. And I think it brings even more benefits to the women's soccer national teams across the world because it would force them to meet more often. If you guys watch some of the friendlies way back in the She Believes Cup, like when Argentina was playing, or even I believe Colombia, I think Ali Wagner mentioned that Argentina, like they when they played the U.S., it was like the first time they had met in like 18 months. That's insane. Like for a national team to not meet for 18 months, I know pandemic pending, of course, but for a national team not to meet that long, for to not meet for that long, it, to me is a little jarring. And if you have a World Cup every 2 years, you create more qualifiers, you create less just friendlies, you create more qualifiers, and inevitably leads to more games and more excuses and more opportunities for these national teams to meet up and get better and grow. So I think it'd be in the best interest of the women's game in order to do this sort of format. So that's another food for thought overall too. And another thing that I want to say is in terms of league play, I don't think this will impact league play a whole lot for a couple reasons. Barring the NWSL, this wouldn't apply to the NWSL this particular point, but there are already international breaks regularly throughout seasons for the FAWSL Division One Feminine, the Australian W League, what have you, where actually maybe the caveat to that would be the Australian W League, but you get my point. There's international breaks regularly for a lot of these teams, and instead of just having friendlies, why not have more World Cup qualifiers? Why not have more qualifiers going on and whatnot, and get games to be more entertaining and draw more people into watching the international break games? So just some more food for thought on that respect. Overall, I'm all for the World Cup because football's fun. Why not draw more people to it? Why not create more opportunity to grow the fan base and get the fandom involved? So, but despite my opinions, of course, there are other larger things that I have to be realistic about as a fan in order to look at it from a different lens. And it's this essentially, we have to look at all the other major tournaments that are impacted, that would be impacted by this move. For example, the Olympics. How would the Olympics be impacted by this move? How would the European Championship be impacted by this move? The Euros is usually done, if I'm not mistaken, every 4 years, also including Olympics. So it's like there's a competition every however many years. I'm starting to lose track because there's so many competitions. But how would these be impacted? Because if you've got the World Cup going on every other year, where does that leave room for these other competitions? Do they get eradicated? Um do they fight back? Like what kind of heads will butt in this particular case? So I'm really curious to see what the impacts on those would be, especially if you love those tournaments. I love any football tournament, so that's just something to keep in mind as well. And the implications on the NWSL, and now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more, the Australian W League would probably be pretty hefty because both of those leagues, hang on, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. Scratch the Australian W League in this point. So just for the NWSL might be affected pretty hefty because if the World Cup is going on every 2 years, that means the NWSL has like a whole month or two roadblock in their schedule where they're going to be missing probably some of the best talent in the world, and that's going to draw attention away from the league overall. So this particular move, if they did go through with it, would probably hurt the NWSL, I would say, overall. However, one thing I do want to say, if a lot of players from the NWSL are playing in the World Cup every other year, it gives a lot more younger players, a lot of players fresh to the league who might not be playing in the World Cup, more chances to shine, more chances to get better, more chances to grow. Thus, again, upping the level of competition in the world of WOSO in general. So there's some good and bad for the NWSL to be had there. Not sure what that exactly would be, but those are just my general thoughts on it too. So, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, this proposal to me was pretty surprising. Like I said, it's just a proposal. Nothing's written in stone yet, so don't go running off saying that, oh my God, FIFA's going to do a World Cup every other year. Not what I'm saying, just saying that it's on their mind. So, what do you guys make of this situation? Jump down in the comments below and let me know what you think. All right, so now with a lot of world football news kind of going down and out of the way, I'm going to get into some NWSL news really quick. The big headline from the week was Mark Parsons leaving the Portland Thorns. He's going to be leaving the Portland Thorns at the end of the NWSL season to coach the Netherlands women's national team. For those of you who are newer to the world of WOSO, I just want to let you know who Mark Parsons is. Mark Parsons is the current head coach of the Portland Thorns, who was hired all the way back in 2016. In his tenure, he's won an NWSL championship. He won that in 2017. He won an NWSL Shield in 2017. He won the NWSL Fall Series at the end of the 2020 season. He won the NWSL Challenge Cup really recently, and he also in that time had 4 playoff berths and 2 NWSL Championship appearances back to back in 2017 and 2018. So what it sounds like he's going to do is he's going to finish the 2021 NWSL season with the Portland Thorns. Then he's going to start his job with the Netherlands women's national team. So I want to make this clear. He's not leaving Portland before the end of the season, and he's also not going to be coaching Netherlands in the Olympics this summer. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. This might have come as a surprise to a lot of people, this move, because Portland, when I think of women's club football, I immediately think of the Portland Thorns. They have done such a crazy good job with their brand. They have great talent. They have no problem going out and getting talent. And they have just built this fantastic, iconic brand in Portland, Oregon that won't be trumped in the NWSL because it's just so powerful and so big. And they have a lot of fans because of it, and I give them mad props. So with how successful they are as a franchise, why would he leave? According to, and I want to make sure I get this right, according to NBC Sports' Dylan McKinnon, it's been for family reasons. So Mark Parsons had this to say: "We lived out here in the United States for 10 years, and that's been challenging being away from my family. The 6, 7, or 8 trips that his family would make to see each other, essentially, that's just gotten tougher and tougher with the pandemic. Of course, it probably hasn't happened at all. So he's stepping away he's stepping away from the team to be with his family, and I don't blame him at all. Of course, you got to love your family and you got to be there for them. So wish him all the best going forward for that, and I'm sure the Portland Thorns fans probably feel the same way. Like I said, he's probably been one of the most successful coaches in the history of the NWSL. So aside from aside from the North Carolina Courage overall. So really interesting move. It begs interesting questions such as who might take his place going forward. This is a big step up for him going to a high-profile women's national team in Netherlands, because the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken, is ranked 4th according to FIFA World's rankings. So Mark Parsons is stepping into a giant role, and I can't wait to see him grow his coaching career over in Europe. So really excited for him. But who might take his place at Portland? My short answer is I really have no idea. No names that I have seen personally from news outlets have been linked to the job. Of course, anybody can form theories, myself included. I'm a fan. I do it all the time. I've even done it on this podcast already many, many times. There's only 2 names that really come to mind that I know are not, that have just gone off of managing high-profile teams and are now on the free market. That's Joe Montemurro and Casey Stoney. I don't think either one of them would be interested in the job, because I think one of the big reasons Joe Montemurro left Arsenal, and I made a video about this in the past, was family reasons, and it was probably just the right time for him to step away. And from what I know, his family lives nowhere near America, so for him to take a job where he's going to be away from his family, which is the reason why he left his old job, that wouldn't make a whole ton of sense to me. So I don't really see Joe Montemurro stepping into the role. The only other person I could see is Casey Stoney, and Casey Stoney's been heavily linked to the job in San Diego with Jill Ellis, and according to The Athletic's Meg Linehan, Casey Stoney in the final stages of negotiations with Jill Ellis and the team expected to play in San Diego. So it sounds like Casey Stoney and Jill Ellis are pretty close to finalizing some kind of a deal for Casey Stoney to take over the NWSL expansion team in San Diego in 2022. So I don't really see that. I don't really see Casey Stoney taking the Portland job, but who knows? That might change. I think Casey Stoney would fit nicely in at Portland. She left Man United because they didn't give her the proper resources to properly train her players and keep them healthy. And I think with the Portland Thorns, from what I know, they treat their players and their franchise and their entire club very, very well. And I think Casey Stoney would thrive in that environment, an environment where the franchise cares about their own players, their own managers, and everyone who works for them. And the Portland Thorns have not been afraid to go out and get the best talent in the league and also throughout the world for the last however many years, mainly from the U.S. Women's National Team and the Canadian Women's National Team. Crystal Dunn, Becky Sauerbrunn, Lindsay Horan, Rocky Rodriguez, Christine Sinclair, Tobin Heath, Alex Morgan at one point. Like, the list goes on and on and on. And I think Casey Stoney, with that amount of support and the amount of resources, and with Portland, Oregon, a city that loves their team, would absolutely thrive and love that kind of environment. So out of the two names that I can think of in my mind, you guys probably know a lot more names in this particular case than I do. This actually wouldn't be such a bad fit for Casey Stoney, even though I don't think she'll actually end up coaching there. The one interesting caveat would be that Casey Stoney would have to adjust to a new league. Overall, the NWSL has so many different rules and nuances that are different from the FAWSL that are super confusing to many people. One of them being mainly the salary cap. That's less of a manager problem, and that's more of a front office problem. So Casey Stoney wouldn't have to worry about the salary cap because Casey would go to the franchise and say, hey, I want this player, this player, this player. And then the front office would say, okay, we've got to work within our constraints to make that happen. So it's up to the front office to really handle that kind of thing. Casey would have to learn some new roles, even in terms of like players assigning rights. Like, that would be a very new concept for her. She even talked about it a little bit with Kristen Press and Tobin Heath back when their rights were drafted, I should say, by Racing Louisville in the expansion draft. So really interesting thought, really interesting ideas. Do I think it'll happen? Probably not, but just something to play around with. But ladies and gentlemen, who do you think will replace Mark Parsons at Portland Thorns at the conclusion of the 2021 season? Whoever you think it might be, feel free to jump down in the comments below and let me know what your thoughts are. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so that's actually going to do it for this episode of Women's Soccer World. Thanks so much for stopping by. I greatly appreciate it. If you like what you're hearing and seeing, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, or visit us on social at my link tree down in the link in the description below. This has been the Women's Soccer World from the Bankrupt Hippo YouTube channel. I've been Bryce. Until next time, have a great day.